To continue the 7 advanced tips series, it's time to talk about Arlecchino. In this video, I will cover some Bond of Life tricks, a few rotations and combos, plus some interactions that she has with certain healing talents or artifacts. If you're looking for more general information, I made a full guide. You can find it in the description. Otherwise, let's start. Firstly, I want to highlight how much of a practical use her burst is, since skipping it completely can often be an actual damage gain. Look at these two runs. Just as an example, we have the same team with Zhongli, Bennett and Kazuha, and the same exact combo without any crit RNG. Here the burst, either used at the start or at the end of the rotation, is likely used when the least amount of buffs are active. So at that point, it can be a better strategy to keep the Bond of Life from not casting the burst, allowing your rotation to shorten and make your second one start with some Bond of Life already. This extra bond will then turn into higher damage for your normals. Obviously, it's possible to go off-field to reapply some of the buffs and come back for the burst, but that's not always the best idea and comes down to the team. And of course, this does not apply when the enemy is about to be defeated anyway, or you need the cast simply to survive. And that's, in my opinion, the real use of this burst at low constellations. This trick can be pushed forward. I will present you with a problem for many Vaporize teams. Since your Bond of Life increases the damage of her normals, and the more attacks you do, the less damage you do, then you really want to Vaporize your first hits. The thing is, many setups will not allow that. As to get a Bond of Life, Arlecchino will require a charger attack, which applies Pyro, and if the Hydro Aura is not strong enough, or not there already, it will result in the first few attacks establishing a Pyro Aura. Usually it's not that bad because Yelan or Xingqiu will quickly get the Hydro back on the enemy. And we can also adjust our setup so that a full Hydro Aura is there when going to Arlecchino. But there is also another trick here, which is using her internal cooldown to our advantage. Arlecchino has a standard internal cooldown, which means that our normal attacks trigger reactions every 3 hits or 2.5 seconds. Her charger attacks have no ICD, meaning if there is an Hydro Aura, they will always vape. Now the thing is, even if you don't have a Pyro Infusion, or not one from the bond, so even if you're doing physical damage, ICD is still getting counted for. So the idea behind this is, what if we use a few attacks before the charger attack, just to coordinate our ICD to be in our favor, and at the same time establish a Hydro Aura before our strongest hits. Basically, instead of switching to Arlecchino to do a charger attack and then proceed to do normals, and maybe losing a vape or two, what I'm doing here is 3 normals, which will trigger her ICD rules, and then proceed to do the charger attack, which will vape and get me the Bond of Life. Now it's time for Arlecchino's 2 highest damaging hits, her first and second normal attack. These are the attacks that get the most buffs, and since we coordinated our ICD, now this two will trigger both rules together. The 3 hit rule and the 2.5 seconds rule, meaning we're getting Vaporize on our 2 biggest hits. That will also coordinate to skip Vaporize on our 4th multi-hit, by the way, which has low damage overall. This trick does not work every single time, as it depends on your timing, but at worst you will vape your first and third hit, which is still pretty good. Okay, I know this might sound very confusing for some, but basically, if you do 3 normals before collecting your mark, you get an easy time getting a Hydro Aura and you also Vaporize your strongest hits. But this is just one out of 1,000 ways you can set up your team, and it's absolutely not a must to perform. But I wanted to show you because it really pushes the limits of ICD rules, and that's just really fun to do. But a useful thing to know at this point, when playing Arlecchino, is that Bond of Life resets between chambers. But you can, at a glance, tell how much Bond of Life you have. The red bar goes up to 200%, which is a cap for any Bond of Life status in the game. So when full, it's 200%. At half, it's a bond of 100%, and Arlecchino will stop having a Pyro Infusion at 30%, which looks like this. Here's a chart of how many attacks are possible on the most common Bond of Life values. Each one consumes 7.5% of the current bond, resulting in the last attacks decreasing the bond by much less, but also being the ones that have the smallest damage buff. Which recalls the incentive I was talking about earlier, to have shorter rotations. Her damage is very front-loaded. However, a great plus that Arlecchino has is her flexibility, which I want to highlight. Yes, you can find a rotation, especially for reaction setups, it's important, but it's worth mentioning that Arlecchino is able to switch during her on-field time for any reason and just come back without losing any of her bond of life. This is a key difference between her and characters like Hu Tao and Yoimiya. In multiple wave content, they have to choose between restarting a rotation or continuing without certain buffs. And I think this is one of her biggest strengths when pushing her limits as a damage dealer, of course together with her insane damage. Like, Furina and Arlecchino teams are being played. Do they make sense together? Absolutely not, but at high investment they can perform very well and allow characters like Kazuha to really shine. Arlecchino has a lot of combos you can explore, and I want to put a great emphasis on the fact that staying alive is way more important than actually hitting a perfect combo. Optimizing your attacks with Arlecchino is not as necessary for your damage output as it would be for a character like Hu Tao. It's more similar to doing a perfect item combo. The 3 attack strings that I have seen being used the most and explored myself are all interrupted at a point by dashing. We have N3D, 3 normals into a dash, the most intensive stamina wise, but easy to do and providing a great damage output as it skips the multi-hit of her 4th attack, which has lower multipliers. And for D, a bit awkward to cancel as your 4th normal is divided into 2 hits, and it's easy to cancel too early, resulting into only one of the 2 coming out, but it's still high damage and less stamina consumption. This combo should be your best in a perfect Vaporize scenario and when using Primordial Jade Winged Spear for faster stacks. And finally, N5D. Easy cancel and even less stamina used, but it's lower damage often. I would avoid N2D as it's too stamina consuming, and if you really push it hard you might have your dash on cooldown. Yes, dash has a cooldown if you do it too fast. And I would avoid getting all the way to her 6th normal as it's really slow but has okay damage and no stamina being consumed, so if you want to just spam attacks it's honestly pretty fine. Again, I don't want you to stress too much on your combo, especially when you don't have a shield. If you know the enemy attack pattern and know that you can get away with it, by any means go for it. Otherwise, just spam and dodge when you need to. Your combo is also technically changing literally every team, and listing and testing all of them is simply not worth it for what you're gaining. We know that Arlecchino cannot be healed in combat, so what about Song of Days Past? Does it work? Chevreuse C6 requires healing to activate, does that work? Okay, first of all, there is a technical way to heal Arlecchino during combat, and I think this is the only way, or at least the only one I found. C6 Barbara and C6 Chi-Chi are technically healing, and they do work with Arlecchino in combat. I guess because being dead equals being out of combat? Question mark? But on something more important, Song of Days Past does indeed work on Arlecchino. It still records the healing even if it doesn't actually happen, just like for overflowing healing. Same applies to Ocean-Hued Clam and C6 Chevreuse. And on a side note, the healing card at the start of a chamber does work, so don't be afraid to pick it up if you need it. The heal happens before actually getting into combat. Lastly, I want to talk about Anemo units for a second. Here's the deal. If you bring an Anemo unit in your Arlecchino team, it's basically a must that you get a Pyro Swirl to activate the Venerer set, and even a Double Swirl if using characters like Yelan or Xingqiu. But since I don't want to bore you to that and make this video 2 hours long, I will just leave 2 rotations here, one for Yelan and one for Xingqiu. Plus, my Kazuha tips video in the description for you to check. We talk plenty of what happens exactly with him and similar Anemo units when trying to set up their teams, and understanding the key difference between absorbing an element and swirling it. Now let's fire off a few quick tips that I found playing her or just hanging out in various Discord groups. She does not need a normal like every other polearm user to use her charger attack, and you probably know she can hold it for faster movement. But all of this also means that you can just spam it and it works almost as well and even on water. Arlecchino is actually briefly invincible, just like Ching when she disappears in her mental skill. She has quite the range when absorbing her mark. You don't actually have to hit the enemy with your charger attack, but it needs to be not too far away, of course. And regarding the general setups, by now you probably know that waiting 5 seconds before her on-field time is a good way to have a higher bond. But also remember that it's not necessary in AoE content. You can still do it, of course, and it makes sense for your buffs, but if you ever mess up, just mark enemies and your charger attack will have a higher bond anyway because you're doing it on more than one enemy. I want to give a big shout out to a few friends in my Discord that helped me translate a video on Bilibili, which is where we found the ICD trick, which is also linked in the description. Sub and like if you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for watching. If there is anything I didn't cover or you want me to cover, please let me know in the comment section. I will see you in the next one.